All right, I'm going to open with a quick Bible reading, because the prescription, no matter how we come at it, in fixing 2020, fixing CRT, fixing the pretext for the COVID hoax, starts and stops with the gospel. So we need a framework to think about this, and there's a passage that Pastor Guthrie actually preached on a few months ago, and it stuck with me. So I'm going to read out of the book of Romans. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Therefore God gave them over in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is non-natural. And in the same way also the men abandoned the natural function of the woman, and burned in their desire toward one another, men with men, committing indecent acts, and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind, to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. And although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them. Does that sound familiar to you? Do we have to go back to Rome to get this picture? So let's fast forward in our time machine. I've been told I'm Ingersoll Lockwood. But there was a sexual revolution in the 1960s and 70s. You could sleep with whoever you wanted. And in the 1980s, you had the AIDS epidemic and the homosexual revolution. And in the 2000s, a new phenomenon started, where a man can choose to be a woman on any given day, at any given time, and then switch back. That's called having a depraved mind. And so right now, we're all trying to figure out, why is it that up is down, down is up, right is left, left is right? Words are inverted, co-opted. Truth is no longer truth, at least when you look at the world. So be encouraged that this is not something that's new. What we're seeing right now in this country is as old as the Garden of Eden. Okay? So we need to attune ourselves to the proper prescription. So we always got to get back to the Bible. Now, I don't know if the screen here is showing anything. We got some folks over there, but let's see what we've got. Do we have anything on the screen? There we go. There's a gentleman there that looks just like me. got green on the screen. Okay. Let's see what we got here. Now I went back in time, but now I want you to go back in time with me to November 3rd, 2020. Is that, why? It's not like it.
County is now going to stop counting at 10:30 p.m. and will resume their count at tomorrow morning.
In a few hours. It's already tomorrow morning, right?
The election workers stopped counting those mail-in ballots at 10 o'clock. They will be back again tomorrow at 10 a.m.
And Nevada says it stopped counting the votes yesterday, election day, but they don't say why. Why did you stop counting them?
Here's where it gets really bizarre. At Fulton County, most populous county, it is Atlanta, they just stopped counting at 10:30 p.m. They stopped counting their absentee ballots. They said they'd pick it up in the morning.
But the counting in one of that state's biggest counties has stopped. Mike Armstrong is in Pennsylvania. Mike, we're talking about Allegheny County. That's the area around Pittsburgh. What's happening?
Right, exactly. What's happening?
All right, so are we back? You guys remember how you felt on November 3rd, 2020? That's why there's nothing that I'm going to tell you tonight that's new to you. We're going to talk about some lies that have been parroted by the snake news media. But that's what you remembered. Your common sense, your intuition told you something was off, and your common sense was right. Right now, Rasmussen, the last time we checked, had 85% of Republicans knowing that the election was rigged. Over 50% of independents feel the same way, and more alarming, Democrats, at least 40% of them know that the election was rigged. We've moved the needle despite having no mainstream coverage, no help from Tucker Carlson, no help from Ben Shapiro, no help from any of the third railers out there that we think are conservatives. But last time I checked, Trump is not in the White House. And no one seems to be covering this with the sense of urgency that's required. You would think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong here, but what happened on November 3rd is no different than if someone came into the White House with a gun and drug Melania and Donald Trump out of their bed. But it's even worse, because half the country doesn't even know what happened. So I was going to bore you with a bunch of technical babble. I'm going to show you a picture here on the pathway of how this cheat occurred. That's a very, very busy picture. But I think of elections as an input-output system. One input would be you and I walking into a polling location. We've all done it in person. And then you show up, and there's usually some sweet, lovely ladies that are there, and they've got these things called poll pads. And there you check out, make sure that you're on the list, and they will print a ballot from the poll pads, and then you can go into your little ballot box and fill it out. Does that sound familiar? Everyone done that? Those poll pads are like iPads. They're hooked to the internet. That's a point of vulnerability. They're hooked to the internet. In New Mexico, they are rented out and collected, so we can't even seize them. They're not even under the custody of the county clerks. But once you go in there and you fill out the ballot, you then feed it into this thing called a tabulator. That's that big garbage can looking machine. And who owns those machines? Could be Dominion, could be ES&S, could be Hart. They're all equally vulnerable, but you run that ballot through the machine and it tabulates, it scans it, it takes a ballot image. Many of those machines are also hooked up to the internet. All right, and there's different ways. They can either affix a chip modem to the machine itself, or you can have a USB modem and they just stick it right in there into a USB slot. And so in New Mexico, for instance, a small county will have 40 tabulators. They're all hooked up to the internet, and you can do all kinds of crazy things once you can hook something up to the internet. So that's another major point of vulnerability with the internet. Now, once you're done casting your ballots, the county clerk will then collect SD cards. They'll take them out. They're just memory cards. You've seen them on your cameras. And they will run them over to the county clerk's office, right? And they will upload them to the county election management system. It's just a computer. The computer's networked, meaning it's hooked up to the internet. You see a pattern here? 3 points of major vulnerability where you can access the machines and do funny things. Now, after that point, from the election management system, everything goes to this company called Seidel. And Seidel has 100% market share on what goes out to the New York Times, what you see on TV, CNN, Edison Reporting, and your Secretary of State websites when you get those updates. All comes from one source, hooked up to the internet. Now, we've been told that these machines don't hook up to the internet. In fact, the CEO of Dominion told us. He swore up and down. So let's watch another video really quick, and you can hear him in his own words. I'll need someone to take the mic here.
Voting systems are, by design, meant to be used as closed systems that are not networked, meaning they are not connected to the internet.
Voting machines are not connected to the internet. This is something that you hear all the time in the US from election officials. Unfortunately, it's not actually true. And many new voting machines come with 4G wireless modems so that they can be connected to the internet from the polling place in order to upload the results faster.
They are not designed to be connected to the outside world through either an internet connection or any other external connectivity device.
What is the vehicle for the transmission from the ICP? Is it cellular modem versus VPN?
Well, it is a cellular modem that can be configured in a VPN, right? And we currently in Chicago and Cook County, we work with Verizon to secure that network.
What wireless chipset / modem does the hardware have?
We support a variety. It's really up to the jurisdictions what technology they want to use, what's compatible with their networks.
Currently, in some jurisdictions, we're using basically a modem that is a 3D modem, GSM, but we can support multiple varieties of modem.
Including latest 4G standards as well.
Verizon, AT&T, or Sprint, assuming all?
Yeah, all networks.
There is no internet connectivity at all.
That I understood that the voting system was separated from the world by an air gap, that they're not connected to the internet. What I thought I heard you say is that you were able to contact Dominion and they were able to fix the problem. That indicates to me that somehow they're able to communicate with the device that you have.
Yes, sir, they were. And to give you an example, the way I am not a tech person, but the best way I can explain it to you is when something happens with my phone that I have an iPhone, or something happens with my Apple computer where I need additional assistance with that. I call up Apple and I say, this is what's happening. And they say, well, do I have permission to take over your computer? And of course I give them the permission to do that because I want it fixed. That was the exact same thing. I had to give them permission to take over my poll pad so that they could reprogram it.
Does Dominion have any way to remotely access any of the information on any of the equipment or have remote access within the machines themselves?
No.
Again, the ICX can have a modem attached to it, and you would transmit directly from that.
Okay, so we're seeing a pattern. There's truth tellers and then there's liars. Now, the gentleman that was at the expo talking about the internet capabilities is the vice president of Dominion. That's Eric Coomer, who has been confirmed to be a member of Antifa, who was heard saying that, don't worry about Trump, I made effing sure he won't win. Now, that's 28 states that has Dominion, and that's their leadership right there. And every one of you, when you go to a county commission meeting or talk with a county clerk, they give you the same exact talking points, making you feel like you're crazy. And I was going to show you another video, but I'll tell you what, I'll send this out in a mix for everyone to see. But there's an actually demonstration here done by an expert that actually flips the votes, prints out a canvas, and so the way that it looks is you'll have one ballot scanned in for Joe Jorgensen of the Libertarian Party. And then you'll have 2 ballots scanned in for Joe Biden, and then 4 ballots scanned in for the real president. And he's able to manipulate them through the ability to hack, and the votes were switched. And that's a video that what we can show you, but it's so small here that I don't know if you'll be able to see it. And change out the printout tape. Then he can go on the device itself and change it in the computer. Now, that's a problem because when we're lied to by your county clerks, they tell you that we do an audit. And what they're talking about is a risk limiting audit where they just match the computer to the printout canvas tapes. But they're incorrect. They don't match the physical ballots. So I think you really do need to see it. Let's just watch it. Let's just watch it, see what happens.
Voting irregularities in County, Michigan. Now, back to Pardo's legal team revealing exclusively to One American News the next phase of their legal strategy. They have brought their own expert who has access to both the voting machines and the tabulation software. Jeffrey Landberg is a systems vulnerability expert with an extensive background in national security who has been brought in by the plaintiffs in the case to give his analysis of the Antrim County election and their use of these electronic voting systems. Here's what Landberg shows. His first ballot is for Jorgensen. There we go. This ballot is for Biden. Next ballot is for Biden. Next ballot is for Trump. 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 And that's the 7th one. Okay, we finished our election. We've done 7, so now we're going to close the polls. Close poll. Now, while it's printing this, I will point out the modification that we made. What we did is for the presidential race, we swapped Biden and Trump votes. We did not change the senatorial race. We swapped the congressional race. So that's what we're looking for. What we'll see is Joe Biden got 4, Donald Trump got 2, and Joe Jorgensen got 1. So you'll notice Biden and Trump votes were swapped. The senatorial race, Peter's got 2, James got 4, and Willis got 1. So there's no modification there. That's just the balance. The third race, the congressional race, Ferguson got 4, Bergman got 2, and Warren got 1. So we swapped those between the top and the second candidate. Checking the drive. Says it's down in the township. Loaded successfully. And we'll look for results. Party is still 0. In the presidential race, that you notice now is Joe Biden has 4, Donald Trump has 2, Joe Jorgensen has 1. We go to the senatorial race. Gary Peters has 2, John James has 4, Willis has 1. We go to the congressional race. Hayden Ferguson has 4, Jack Bergman has 2, and Warren has 1. So what you see is the results now match the tape printout here. So when you do the canvas, they will match. But they're not correct. They don't match the ballots.
How many of you have seen that video? Okay, so many of you are familiar with that. So you have to be on the lookout for your county clerks telling you that you can't flip votes, you can't shuffle votes. But the reality is you can. And it's much more intricate than what was shown there, because that was actually done in last May. We found out all kinds of things. How many here saw the trailer for Dinesh D'Souza's new film, 2,000 Mules? Okay, so let's start looking at the system once again. We had input, and we've got an output. That's what we see on TV. But the input, once you go into those poll pads, information is being relayed to your centralized Secretary of State's office right off the bat. And they can start making predictions, because normally registered Republicans tend to vote for Republicans, and registered Democrats tend to vote for Democrats. That information's sent about. You can start tailoring your predictions. And with that information, you can now deploy assets to your drop boxes. And that's what we saw across the country. I'll give you a picture of one. But the trailer is actually amazing. But here is a picture of a gentleman, and I believe this is in Georgia, taking a picture after he fans out what appears to be about 20 fake ballots. And he has to take a picture of them because that's how he gets paid. Takes a picture of them in front of the box, drops them in. So now you can start reconciling what's being caused by the machines. All right, the machines work in different ways, but some of the things that you'll find out, and I'm willing to bet it exists here in South Carolina just like it does in New Mexico, is that someone is artificially inflating your voter rolls. There's got to be a line of credit. And why do I say that? Let me show you a graph here. This is a graph of 12 different counties in New Mexico. You'll notice that they have the same shape, the same peaks, the same adjustments. This is registration rolls in New Mexico for all 3 parties. There's never a day where there's not inflation. You'd think some clerk offices shut down on Saturday and Sundays, not according to our charts here. And in fact, by law, they're supposed to shut down after the elections to clean up their voter rolls for about 2 months. Wild spikes. All 33 counties look identical. So think about that. If you're the poor gal, we'll call her Ethel, who's always so proud about cleaning up the voter rolls, every county's got one. They labor over it to find out that as soon as you walk out the door, through machine vulnerability, you just reinflate them. And they also take away from them as well. But it's machine driven. So now you've got all kinds of data that's at work in the manipulation of your vote. And, you know, in small rural counties like where I live, you can get by with mules, okay? But when you're trying to steal a national election, when you're trying to steal an election from the president, you're going to need greater switches. And that's why you saw the major reboots that took place in your swing states in target counties. And we're going to give you an example of a massive switch here in a second.
election night, real-time coverage of vote totals and updates were handed down by data collectors such as Edison and sent to the various media companies. This is an entirely automated process with only a one-way interface on the side of those media companies to the sources. In the following video example, CNN experiences an on-camera switch in their reporting for the state of Pennsylvania. The county source is feeding live on television a count of 1,690,589 votes for Trump and 1,252,537 votes for Biden. The time is approximately 11:08, 28 seconds Eastern Standard. The next time Pennsylvania is shown on the screen, there are 1,670,631 votes for Trump and 1,272,495 votes for Biden. The time is approximately 11:09, 1 second Eastern Standard. Live on television, CNN demonstrated a 19,958 exact vote switch from candidate Trump to candidate Biden. This means Trump lost nearly 40,000 votes.
Someone remind me what the margin of victory, supposed victory, was in Pennsylvania? It was close. So this is just one snapshot. Now I can get you another 24 clips just like this because people were monitoring their screens. The last time we saw this was in the recall election in California with Gavin Newsom, remember? Where I believe 2 million signatures were collected, over 40% from Democrats. Only Gavin looked as smug as could be. He didn't seem like he was worried because he understood they were going to run the recall election through Dominion machines. Same vote switches here. Now you can't get away with 40,000 votes flipped through mules, at least not effectively. So in some places you have to be much more careful. Or not careful, maybe reckless is the word. And here's an example in Wayne County, 3 o'clock in the morning. What you're seeing here, there's no audio on this one, so you're fine. 3 o'clock in the morning, you got people basically bringing in delivery vans. And what you're going to see here is the unloading of tens of thousands of ballots after the polls closed. Well after midnight, the dark of night. So whether it means having ballots driven to you from New York to Pennsylvania, or from Pennsylvania to Michigan, or to have them printed in mass by a company called Runback, they're going to scan them. Now all of these ballots will be run through those same tabulators in the dark of night. Just like what happened with Ruby Freeman in Georgia, where they pulled out all those boxes. They were running those ballots through tabulator scanners, and someone counted it up, and there was about 18,000 ballots that were scanned that were caught on video. And I believe the margin of supposed victory in Georgia is what, about 10,000? 12,000? Okay, so more than the margin. If you hear nothing else that I tell you tonight, just know that this is machine driven. All this other stuff is just part of the cover-up. And if you would have had a lukewarm, predictable Rhino Republican, we would have never seen this. They can set their set point with precision. So if you had Mitt Romney as your standard bearer, we would not have seen this. You wouldn't have had this requirement to have the cover-up to look like this. It took someone like Donald Trump, who took from all parties. Democrats voted for him in historic record turnout. And we saw that specifically in Florida. And if you recall, in Miami-Dade counties, the Cuban-American population came out in force for Trump because they fled communism. That wasn't supposed to happen according to the cabal, the election cartel. And something odd happened. We found out later that in Osceola County, which is where Disney World is, the fiber line was cut, and that might have interfered with these algorithms working with precision in Florida. And then something else happened that was interesting, because after Biden legitimately lost Florida and they couldn't pull off the heist there, Arizona became must win. And if you recall on election night, what happened in Arizona? That's right. On a razor-thin margin, still early in the night, Fox News, of all people, called it because they had to. They had to. They had no choice at that point. All right, so let's go ahead and close this out. Now, was there a plan? Was there a conspiracy? You know, at first people used to attack me. Are you telling me that all of these government elites are conspiring together? And I would respond, are you telling me that 5,000 average Americans filled out affidavits subjecting themselves to perjury? Because, you know, what's the larger conspiracy, right? It was a conspiracy. And we saw that through that Times article magazine. And so bear with me, but we're going to listen to Joe Biden kind of mumble on and tell you about all the different players in this conspiracy, because they were telling us before election night was in. Okay, go ahead and sit here. I'm fine. Okay, we can do it. Great.
We have a whole group of lawyers who are going out to every voter registration physician in the states, the secretaries of state, making sure that they in fact have a game plan as to how they're going to allow the voting to take place. We are continuing to push what Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in the House did. They passed the money to allow for voting in place, to have not only voting by mail, but also voting in place by providing the necessary equipment for social distancing, sanitation. We've 10,000 people have volunteered. We're going to try to get them plugged in as poll workers, not for us, but running the mechanisms in the states that they work for the state operations. Because last time, I don't want this excuse that the reason why we closed down, I'm making the number up, there are 30 polling places in a predominantly minority neighborhood, but now there's only 5 because we don't have enough poll workers. So we're doing everything we possibly can to make sure that we are making contact with every governor and every person in charge of the electoral process in their states. We have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics.
Folks, we got a lot of work to do. I don't need you to get me elected. I need you once I'm elected.
It's no longer just about who gets to vote or making it easier for eligible voters to vote. It's about who gets to count the vote.
Yeah, and it's fitting. You got Ruby there scanning those ballots as he says that. Okay, so lots of questions, and we want to know, was there a plan? Of course there was a plan. You just heard the plan, but you also had someone like Bernie Sanders on October 23rd, 2020, looked into a crystal ball and told you exactly what was going to happen. Did you all see him on Jimmy Fallon? Well, let's watch him one more time because we're not depressed enough.
At 10 o'clock on election night, Trump is winning in Michigan, he's winning in Pennsylvania, he's winning in Wisconsin, and he gets on the television and he says, "Thank you, Americans, for re-electing me. It's all over. Have a good day." But then the next day and the day following, all of those mail-in ballots start getting counted, and it turns out that Biden has won those seats. At which point Trump says, "See, I told you the whole thing was fraudulent. I told you those mail-in ballots were crooked."
Okay, so Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, he's pretty darn accurate on exactly what would happen. It's almost as if this was planned. Now, I recall there being a time when Democrats seemed to care about election vulnerability, and we have to reconcile that. So here's some of our most favorite Democrats talking about their concerns over election systems.
I continue to think that our voting machines are too vulnerable.
Researchers have repeatedly demonstrated that ballot recording machines and other voting systems are susceptible to tampering.
Even hackers with limited prior knowledge, tools, and resources are able to breach voting machines in a matter of minutes.
In 2018, electronic voting machines in Georgia and Texas deleted votes for certain candidates or switched votes from one candidate to another.
The biggest seller of voting machines is doing something that violates Cybersecurity 101, directing that you install remote access software, which would make a machine like that a magnet for fraudsters and hackers.
These voting machines can be hacked quite easily.
You could easily hack into them. It makes it seem like all these states are doing different things, but in fact 3 companies are controlling them.
It is the individual voting machines that pose some of the greatest risks.
There are a lot of states that are dealing with antiquated
Come on.
machines, right, which are vulnerable to being hacked.
Workers were able to easily hack into an electronic voting machine. It was possible to switch votes.
43% of American voters use voting machines that researchers have found have serious security flaws, including backdoors.
We know how vulnerable now our systems were. I know the hackathon that took place last year, where virtually every machine was broken into fairly quickly.
I actually held a demonstration for my colleagues here at the Capitol, where we brought in folks who, before our eyes, hacked election machines, those that are being used in many states.
Aging systems also frequently rely on unsupported software, like Windows XP in 2000, which may not receive regular security patches and are thus more vulnerable to the latest methods of cyber attack.
In a close presidential election, they just need to hack one swing state, or maybe 1 or 2, or maybe just a few counties in one swing state.
I'm very concerned that you could have a hack that finally went through.
Okay, I think it did, Amy. Okay, so folks, we've got this paradox, right? Because none of these folks are talking about any machine vulnerabilities. They're saying that it was the safest and most secure election ever. But we use all the same machines, and we use the same software. So what happened? I think what happened here was that they weren't sure that they were going to be successful in 2020 because of what happened in 2016. Because in 2016, the same machines were being used. In fact, Hillary, who was the selection that they wanted, she said that the election was stolen from her. But she never called for an audit because it would have revealed all the things that we're discovering now. So I think either way, the propaganda machine was creating a template for if something happened and somehow Trump massively overwhelmed the algorithm, which he did. But you've got, it took 4 years for them to get Zuckerbucks, $400 million donated to different states. In New Mexico, he donated $4.2 million. That money went to poll pads and to drop boxes. The poll pads, as we mentioned, work in tandem with the drop boxes to start stuffing them and having a paper trail that more or less matches the computer hack. Okay? Now, there's a lot of folks in government that are buddy-buddy with Dominion. There's a gentleman here that wants to tell you about his love of Dominion in Maricopa County.
Just a few minutes talking a little bit about my term because it was the setup for 2020. 2020 didn't just happen. 2020 was something that we started planning for in the office in January of 2017. Yeah, that's right, almost 4 full years ahead of time because we knew it was going to be an incredibly large event and very important. And in early 2017, the first part of my term, we locked down a lot of important things that needed to be locked down in Maricopa County. And it enabled us to implement some really important changes. One of which was creating a site book technology. What is a site book? Well, it's like an e-poll book, but it's not. You see, the traditional e-poll books are pieces of equipment where the registrar of voters will send the information to the company. The company will encode it for the e-poll books, and that's what you use to check in voters. The site book was created in-house in Maricopa County in the department that I had. We created it from whole cloth, wrote all the code, and we have live updates back to the back office. Maricopa County has been a Dominion county for a long, long time. And Dominion had offices inside the ballot tabulation center and 2 full-time employees who worked out of the county facility all the time. That was their office. That's how big of a customer Maricopa County has been to Dominion Election Services.
Dominion employees were the only ones that were running any of that equipment. So, no, and I was in the tabulation center 6 different days, day and night shifts. And no county employees, no IT people, no one else was touching any of the software. They did all the training for the adjudicators. They ran all the reports. And so, and I brought that up on my very first day in the room. I said, this doesn't seem right. As a person with my background, never in a million years would I turn my company's most important thing over to someone else. And there's only 2 guys. And they had the whole control of everything.
Okay. Now, you also have to have a cover-up. So they're talking about Maricopa, and for 10 days, ballots just kept showing up, right? Because Arizona became must-win. Interestingly enough, within a few days after the election, some people did some dumpster diving, and they found about 185,000 shredded ballots outside of the MTech Center. Now, this is important because while this is playing, you have to keep in mind the timeline in Maricopa, because Maricopa was supposed to be the domino that was to fall. You see, the Arizona Senate subpoenaed paper ballots, routers, spunk logs, because the people there were alarmed at what they saw. They knew that it was a Republican state. They knew it was a Trump victory in Arizona. Now, so you look at that giant mess of shredded ballots right there. Well, for 4 months, the county reporter, who you just heard talk, actually he was the predecessor, but the county board of supervisors fought tooth and nail in the courts to make sure that none of that was turned over. All right, eventually, after 4 months, the court said the subpoena is legal. You have to turn this stuff over. And almost immediately, we found out with the audit report in September that you had 263,000 corrupted ballot images. Mass corruption, mass scrubbing that was going on there. So perhaps this was all of the ballots, but there was also a strange fire at Hickman Farms. Clint Hickman is the owner of that farm, and he sat on the board of supervisors. You would think at a bare minimum, based on 8 hours of testimony, a mysterious fire, tens of thousands of shredded ballots, there would have been an investigation immediately from Mark Brnovich, who's running for Senate, the Attorney General, and he didn't do anything. He did nothing. And he still hasn't done anything. The Maricopa report has been given to him. There's been 0 arrest, 0 indictments. All he did was send a letter of preservation a year after the fact, after we learned that there was a massive destruction. Okay, so I'm going to stop showing you videos and maybe walk you through this. So we talked about Romans. Our country has been given over to a depraved mind. And we're just not seeing the truth the way that we need to see it. We're susceptible. It's like we're under a spell. But you have to look at what the real battle is. This is not left versus right. This is not Democrat versus Republican. This is good versus evil. And when we talk about the deep state, what exactly are we talking about? I would venture to say we're talking about the intelligence community. You see, the intelligence community precedes politicians getting elected or selected, and they're there long after our candidates and our politicians leave public office. And the intelligence community wants to maintain the status quo. They want to maintain the government elite. And they will be deployed at any time when their power is disturbed. And their power was disturbed by Donald Trump. So they attack all truth movements. Here's the truth. There was election fraud. Everyone knows it. That's truth. And there's no way that that genie was going to go back in the bottle. The deep state knew it. The intelligence community knew that this was too big of a crime that they committed. But they had to respond. Remember, they've been using these same machines overseas, overseeing regime change for years. So what do? They take a real crisis and they reframe it. but they reframe it in a way that minimizes the culpability of the deep state. They start scrubbing names. And then, if they're really savvy, they'll create a solution to their reframe crisis that doesn't address the real problem. And along the way, they'll set up PACs and they'll raise money. Everyone here will pick their favorite politicians that are going to save them with that new manufactured solution to the reframe crisis that doesn't address the root problem. You follow me? And we will watch political theater because the deep state has a very powerful tool known as propaganda, and they use it through the state news media outlets. And they have a feed that tells you what your truth is. It's not the truth, but they'll tell you what you need to think, how you need to think, and they'll shame you and bully you if you don't think the way that they tell you to. Does that sound familiar? Yes. So we just talked about the Maricopa audit. Who oversaw the audit? All right, so when I think of the intelligence community, I think of something like, let's see here. Is there this thing called the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency? There is. Is there a certain gentleman that was appointed by Barack Obama to head up the Defense Intelligence Agency? Named Michael Flynn. That's interesting. Now, he is a member of many different groups, one of which is the America Project, which is run by his brother Joe Flynn, and Council on Foreign Relations member Patrick Byrne, who shares membership with George Soros. They were the chief financiers of the Maricopa audit. And we have recordings, thanks to my dear friend Lynn, of Patrick Byrne telling everyone that he thought the chief architect was incompetent. That's Doug Logan of Cyber Ninjas. Why would you pay someone you're telling everyone's incompetent $5 million to perform an audit? Now, you could say that they just ran it into the ground, or maybe they're incompetent, or perhaps it was intentional. Because there's certain things that happen throughout that audit that should make you sick. And you see, the best lies are the ones that are wrapped around as much truth as possible. So you had folks that showed up here in the Low Country, and they tried to hatch their plot, and that was Michael Flynn. Doug Logan was here. Did you know that Doug Logan was in your backyard back in November? The same guy that ran the audit. Patrick Byrne was here in the Low Country. The same guy that pays people that he thinks are incompetent. And then you had an actor that showed up out of nowhere, Jovan Hutton Pulitzer, whose real name is Jeffrey Filia. We call him Jeffrey Fooled You, because millions of dollars were allocated towards his kinematic artifact detection, magic, sorcery, and yet he never provided an official report, never testified, and by the time he was pressured into providing a preliminary report, you find out that it was nothing but a regurgitation of what the canvassers did. They put a bunch of shiny graphics on it, and it was sold as kinematic artifact detection, courtesy of Tesla Laboratories. A bunch of fancy sounding names and a bunch of garbage. And I sent that over, because I'm not a scientist, to Dr. Shiva. And within 48 hours, he tore it apart. It was absolutely fraudulent. So think about that. You have people that are all part of the America Project co-opting, infiltrating, and neutralizing that audit. You had fraudsters trying to get to the bottom of fraud. Now, you had good experts. Dr. Shiva was one of them. So you need to have the credibility, so they will tie themselves to people with credibility. And Shiva's got tons of credibility, 4 degrees from MIT. He invented email, not Al Gore. And they handed him, he was supposed to scan and analyze the ballot images, and Doug Logan gave him corrupted images, even though he had the legit images from the outset. Shiva did not get the correct image set until November, 2 months after the issuance of the report. The other gentleman that was a credible expert was a Mr. Cotton from Cypher, and he could look at cyber interference. And they never provided Mr. Cotton with Splunk logs and the routers, which would have told him what he needed to know. So you had two credible experts that were compromised from the outset, while you had this incompetent fool withholding evidence. And that's the America Project, led by a chief spook who was in intelligence for 33 years. And we're all $11 million poorer for it, with no answers. And you had a report that was issued, there's a draft, that used the word fraud, that called for decertification. And by the time they posted it, they removed all mention of that word. And there was no call for decertification. They slow walked the audit, sucked us dry, and everyone started finding their idols, their spooks to praise. And instead of having justice, we felt demoralized. So you've had people like myself, people like Lynn, that have been the bearer of bad news. No one takes pleasure in telling you that you have people here that grifted and hurt the American people. But I don't answer to a general. I don't answer to Patrick Byrne. I got a 10-year-old son, and he wants to know when this war is going to end. And our job would be a lot easier if we didn't have a bunch of spooks in the way. So that's the reality of an application of that construct, where we all watch theater in Maricopa County. And in the process, what did we do? We didn't clean up our own mess in our own county, in our own state. We were watching there, hoping that that would be the solution. Well, that solution was taken from us. So I'm advocating for something called the 3-vote strategy. It might be 5 votes. There's different terminology. You might not have a county commission. Basically, what you want to do is find whoever administers your election locally and certifies it. And you got to find them. We were able to do that in New Mexico. We found courageous county commissioners that voted unanimously for a full forensic audit. And we're being fought tooth and nail. It ain't over yet, so don't clap for us just yet. But our canvassing returns are out of this world. 40% of those that we canvassed have erroneous information. 40% in a red county. 6%, we went to the door and we asked them, did you vote? Yes, we did. It doesn't say you voted according to the vote rules. Their votes were lost. They were dropped. We had another 2% that were ghost voters. And over half of the voter rolls, the people were gone, which means it supports our hypothesis that they are artificially inflated. They're just not there. And they don't clean them up. So what I am going to try to ask you from a practical standpoint is we have to stop watching. This group here needs to show up to its next county commission meeting and show up. And usually the way that it works is there will be a time for public comment. And every one of you will get 2 to 3 minutes to talk. Every one of you needs to talk about the machines being a problem. And then you hand the microphone, and the next person talks about the machines being a problem. And have these videos ready to go to show these lying, treasonous, I'll watch my language, Stuart Guthrie's here. But you know what I mean. And you ask for something to be put on the agenda. A discussion of your machines, whether they're ES&S or Dominion, and you can have experts come there and talk about it, and we can find the experts for you. Now, they might not do that, but ultimately it doesn't matter. You want a no confidence vote from those 3, that there will never be a corrupt, rigged election device in this county ever again. And you go back to paper. There was a magical time called the 1990s. And for 200 years prior to that, we all voted on paper, for the most part. And there was a time when you voted, you knew exactly who your next representative was that night. Those days are over. Ever since these machines have come in, we don't know who wins until they keep bringing in those ballots to cover up the rigged selection. Now, speaking of selections, beware. Beware of those rhino Republicans that are talking about this red wave nonsense. See, right now they're desperate. They need to co-opt this because you're here. We're learning the truth. And so they're saying, go out there and overwhelm the machines. Let's have more poll watchers. Let's clear up the voter rolls. And I just showed you that it doesn't matter. They'll have initiatives for that, and they never talk about the machines. And the victory that they're touting more than anyone's is Glenn Youngkin in Virginia. Without doing any research, realize that Glenn Youngkin for 25 years worked for the Carlyle Group, and there's financial ties with Staple Street, which owns Dominion. He is bought and paid for by Dominion. And you had experts like Draza Smith, who actually learned what the set point was and predicted while the election was going on exactly how it would end up. That shouldn't happen, but it did, real time. But you have to watch out for the rhinos because they put on good disguises. So we talked about the intelligence community. We talked about how they reframe real problems, provide solutions to that reframed crisis. We talked about that. The other image I want you to leave in your head is a two-headed eagle. Two-headed eagle. Left and right, left and right. But they feed the same bloated belly. And you'll see that two-headed eagle in a lot of your Freemason lodges. Isn't that fitting? But if you're going to fool this crowd, you can't look like the eagle that looks like AOC or Bernie Sanders. You can see that person a mile away. That's not a very good disguise. And if you're the devil, you've got to be crafty. He's the chief deceiver. So he needs to look a lot like you. He needs to wrap himself in the American flag. Pray to God every once in a while. Talk about babies and Bibles and bullets. But he might not be praying to the same God as you and me. Might be praying to the 7 rays of light. See the problem here, folks? Okay, so where do we go with this? Where's your hope? I've given you a practical solution on where to go. You don't have to run those 3 votes at the county level through a Dominion machine. You can get an up or down vote. It's possible. And my hope is that in one county, in every state, it's like a Jenga block. You pull it out and you say, there, we're going to do a paper-based election. And then you're going to compare that paper-based election to the rigged counties. The whole thing falls apart. We need to start pulling these blocks everywhere. And where do we go? We go to places that have been ignored, rural counties, America First counties, because what we've been trying to do is go in places like Maricopa where corruption is condensed. You've got major bottlenecks. Yes, there's more fraud there. Yes, there's more fraud in Fulton County. Yes, there's more fraud in Horry County. But you've got spooks and specters that will keep you from the truth. So you've got to go to the place that everyone has ignored and see what happens, okay? So that's a practical strategy. I think you understand who the deep state is now, and you have to be on the lookout. So where do I leave you? I'm going to leave you with the ultimate prescription, at least for me. And we've got to get back to the gospel real quick. How many here profess to be Christians? Almost everyone here. Do we act like Christians? I mean, act like it. That's a different question. You see, Peter the apostle, he spent time with Jesus. He told Jesus he loved him. He told Jesus he was the Messiah. And Jesus told him, that didn't come from you, that came from God. Peter reassured Jesus, I will never leave you. I will never betray you. But when the going got tough, he denied him 3 times. That was pre-resurrection Peter. I'd venture to guess that at least half the people here, whether you'll have been or not, are like Peter pre-resurrection. We are nominal. When we go to Outback Steakhouse, we mutter about whether we're going to put a mask on to get to the table from the hostess station. Maybe it's different here. But a lot of folks, if you go out there, folks, this gnaws on people's brains. And these are God-fearing Christians. But they don't act that way. They act a lot like Peter. A lot of talk. A lot of talk about the Constitution. A lot of talk about God. Yet our kids are stuck in these godless schools, being masked up. We've sacrificed our children. I want to be like Peter post-resurrection. Post-resurrection Peter. Why did Peter abandon? Why did he betray Jesus? Because he was scared. He was scared they're going to kill him. And at some level, whether you act today or tomorrow is rooted in fear. I'm afraid that I'll lose my job. I'm afraid that my friends won't like me. I'm afraid that things will be difficult at the dinner table. And on January 6th, I had my Peter moment. And I didn't care if I had a job anymore, so I don't have one. I'm an attorney for a little longer. I'm an attorney that no one can hire. License being threatened. That's why I've got a special kinship with Lynn. Most qualified man I've ever seen. A trial legend. And we have to advise our clients that if we were to represent you, it'll be held against you. Our livelihood's been taken. But the truth is more important. When Peter realized that Christ conquered death and came back, his fear was removed. And the next time he sees Christ, he jumps off a boat like a fool and starts swimming toward his Savior. And he never stopped following him until he was crucified upside down. And every other apostle met the same fate except for John. So stop waiting for your Hollywood story and look for your biblical story, where the martyrs for the faith, they knew where their reward was. Paradise, they knew where comfort was. It's in heaven, waiting for them. But once you strip that fear, you're unstoppable. Have your Peter moment, go to that commission meeting. Have your Peter moment, stand up for your children. And stop asking permission from these godless cowards about your future, my future, our children's future. January 6th changed me. I knew that I couldn't go back into a classroom and tell people my country was okay, that the Constitution was okay. And even now, we've got prisoners that are locked up without due process on misdemeanor charges. Wives separated from spouses, children separated from fathers. And they were the original Fix 2020 advocates. They were the original people that knew how to fight back and showed up with passion. Please don't forget them. Do not forget them. There is no self-help book for fearlessness. You find Jesus, who conquered death, who removes your fear. The gospel fixes everything, because if you know the truth, but you have to know the truth, and the truth is Christ. If you know Jesus, you can see through election fraud. You can see through CRT, demonic garbage. You can see through medical tyranny. There's no superpower. It's the Holy Spirit at work in and through you. So let's get back to Christ. Tonight, I ask you, I beg you, get on your knees tonight by your bed. Hug your spouse, hug your children. Repent. Pray for revival. Say, God, I'm sorry. Please save us. Save us. He's a covenant keeper. I believe he will. I believe firmly that we're going to win. It's not a matter of if. We are going to win. We're going to win. But we haven't felt enough pain. You might have. I feel like I've had my share. But don't look at this pain as without purpose. Pain is the most fertile soil for the gospel. And your politicians have let you down, haven't they? Then don't go to the politicians, go to God. Your judges have let you down, haven't they? Well, don't go to the judges, go to God. And then you'll have your country back. So let me close this with a brief word of prayer. And I know that we've got Mr. Firebringer himself up next. Dear Lord, I want to pray a special prayer of blessing and protection on this crowd. We need shepherds, but we need fierce shepherds. Shepherds that will unfurl the crook and smack a godless commie across the nose to protect their flock. We need post-resurrection Peters that are fearless. We need everyone here to talk to their circle of influence and get the message out to fix 2020. But most importantly, we need you, Lord. We need God Almighty. Order our paths, make them straight. Give us the gift of obedience, Lord, and let us praise your name, glorify your name, and watch you work. We ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all.